Most haunted asylums. Abandoned asylums are some of the most frightening and fascinating places in the U.S. These former hospitals and institutions for the mentally ill have been left to decay and are now considered some of the most haunted places in the country. These asylums are usually abandoned, their halls and rooms filled with the echoes of the past. However, people say that the spirits of former patients still roam the halls, looking for a way to escape. The Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is an astonishing structure that leaves visitors in a sea of wonder. The Gothic Revival Tudor is the largest hand-carved stone in the U.S. and the second in the world. The Allegheny Lunatic Asylum started construction around the Civil War. It wasn't completed until 1881 due to disruptions from the war. The structure of the building is massive, with 9 acres of floor spaces with over 900 doors and windows. A railway system in the basement was ahead of its time and distributed food via dumbwaiters to other floors of the building. Like most asylums, this one also has a history of tragic incidents. The building was designed to bring light, comfort, and order to the residents' lives, but as time went by, it became dark. The Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was constructed to hold 250 patients comfortably, but had many more due to mismanagement. By 1950, the asylum held over 2,300 patients, and conditions were terrible for the residents. With this many patients, the building's floors and ceilings were decaying, and patients' beds were in the hallways instead of rooms. There was only one aide for up to 70 residents and one toilet per 57 residents. The patients were constantly restrained to help control the wild population. By this time in asylum history, barbaric treatment methods had been introduced, like tranquilizers, electroshock therapy, and the worst of all, lobotomies, surgical disabling of the brain's prefrontal lobes. Apart from overcrowding, several incidents of patient abuse occurred. Patients were lobotomized with ice picks, chained for many days, and kept in cages like animals, leading to several patient deaths. In those days, patients admitted to the asylum didn't leave. Instead, patients who died in the asylum were buried in one of 3 cemeteries on the property. One of the most famous ghosts of the asylum, named Lily, haunts visitors with her cries and laughing. Lily was one of the youngest residents who died of pneumonia in the Civil War era. Other visitors see and hear other patients of the past. The Lier Sykehus Asylum in Norway was built in 1926 for mentally ill people who were brought to the Lier colonies to work as farmers. Sadly, patients were used as guinea pigs. Newly released drugs at the time that were prohibited from being used on the general public and even in human experiments were used on the mentally ill patients of Lier Sykehus. As a result, many patients died due to unethical drug experiments. During the 1940s and 1950s, psychotropic drugs like LSD were used to keep patients sedated. In 1983, a former nursing assistant published a book detailing how the patients were left in tattered clothing and forced to lie in their own excrement. The book caused such an angry reaction from the public that the hospital ended up closing in 2013. Since the building has been abandoned, many have walked its halls searching for paranormal activity. Some have reported seeing apparitions, shadow figures, and hearing disembodied voices both in the buildings and on the grounds. There have also been reports of unexplained noises, including screams, crying, loud bangs, cold spots, mysterious touches, tugs, and pulls from unseen presences. Light anomalies and electrical disturbances have also been reported. Rolling Hills Asylum is well known as the second most haunted location in the U.S. Built in 1827, Rolling Hills Asylum, formerly known as Genesee County Poorhouse, was a refuge for some of the community's most impoverished. Unlike most asylums, the population included widows and orphans mixed in with those that struggled with mental illness. The asylum has documented over 1,700 deaths, with many others undocumented. Those unfortunate enough to die within the walls were buried in unmarked graves on the property. The 53,000 square foot facility has been the site of many paranormal experiences. Since the facility is now abandoned, the asylum attracts many paranormal investigators and people curious about the building. People have heard voices on their EVP recorders that weren't heard when they were in the facility. For example, one guest recalls seeing an apparition dressed in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform walk past the doorway. When looking out to the hall, the apparition had disappeared, but the sound of shoes squeaking could still be heard. In another experience, visions of a patient in an old metal tub with a nurse leaning over them were seen when looking into a room. Other people have heard murmuring and have felt someone touch them when walking down the halls. Some have heard someone screaming during the night, doors slamming, and visions of the famous giant, Roy Krause, who lived in the asylum and died in 1942. One hallway in Rolling Hills Asylum is well known as the Shadow Hallway, which is famous for the numerous shadowy appearances that peek out from windows and doors. These shadowy spirits wander and crawl across the corridors of the asylum. The Danvers Lunatic Asylum's Gothic structure makes people curious about its history. Danvers State Hospital, also referred to as Danvers Lunatic Hospital, was built for the moral treatment of mentally ill people in 1878. The hospital had a dark and evil history when it was in operation. However, it now stands abandoned and partially demolished. Danvers State Hospital had evil origins from the beginning. It was built on Hathorne Hill, where the judge who presided over the Salem witch trials, John Hathorne, once lived. Another notable fact is that it is known as the birthplace of the most controversial and barbaric procedure in medical history, the prefrontal lobotomy. The first lobotomy was performed in 1948 and became a staple treatment for many unfortunate patients. Unfortunately, like many asylums during that time, it was overcrowded with over 2,600 patients when the building was built to hold 500. Patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, psychosurgery, and lobotomies to calm the overpopulated hospital. Since such massive quantities of lobotomies were performed during this time, Danvers set the stage for other asylums to adopt the horrifying practice. The overcrowding caused a massive decline in patient care, and patient deaths began to increase. Sometimes patients who had passed weren't found for many days after their death, leaving the bodies to rot and cause diseases that spread to other patients. The hospital closed its doors in 1992, but the grounds are forever stained with horrifying memories of the past. Some buildings still stand, but an apartment complex was built on the land. During the construction of the apartments in 2007, mysterious fires started occurring. People have reported seeing apparitions of former patients roaming around the grounds. Eastern State Hospital was America's first public facility constructed solely for the care and treatment of the mentally ill. Formerly known as the Public Hospital for Persons of Insane and Disordered Minds, the first patients admitted to the hospital were in 1773. In those days, mental illness was considered untreatable, with very few options to treat patients. The governor of the Virginia colony, Francis Frankier, suggested keeping mentally ill people in one home or asylum. At this suggestion, construction on Eastern State Hospital began. The hospital only had 24 cells with barred windows and steel doors to contain patients. As a result, patients were treated more like inmates than patients. They focused on keeping them locked up to keep them from normal members of society. Patients were restrained with straitjackets while being chained and shackled in solitude. The facility even used adult-sized cribs stacked on top of each other to confine patients. For especially unruly patients, they were locked up in dungeon-like cells that were built under the first floor of the building in 1799. Treatments within the hospital were horrific and inhumane. One of the most barbaric practices was a contraption known as the tranquilizer chair, an invention by Dr. Benjamin Rush. Dr. Rush believed mental illness was caused by brain inflammation, and the chair was designed to help to decrease the blood flow to the brain. Patients were strapped to the chair and blindfolded to induce fear, which was said to induce sanity. A bucket was also placed below the chair because patients were administered laxatives to release body impurities. Other inhumane treatments included electric shocks, bloodletting, and plunging patients into ice-cold water. Many medical professionals of that time believed fear was the cure for mental illness, so many of their treatments were done to induce fear. When patients passed away, they were buried on the hospital grounds in unmarked graves, like many asylums of the time. However, some say the spirits of former patients still haunt the hospital grounds to this day. A spirit haunts the hedge maze and manifests as a set of ghostly white feet moving closer.